Hello and welcome to another episode of Count Me In. Today we're diving headfirst into the complex and ever-evolving world of cryptocurrencies. We're excited to have Jason Cozens with us, the CEO and founder of Glint, a global fintech platform. He's an expert in cryptocurrencies and alternative currencies, and he'll be sharing his extensive knowledge about the current state of the market, why cryptocurrencies exist in the first place, and their inherent risks. He'll also shed light on the appeal of gold as a stable, risk-off asset and how it's being modernized for everyday transaction with technologies like Glint. So if you're curious about the state of cryptocurrencies or the power of gold as an alternative, this episode is a treasure trove of information. Let's dive in. Jason, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. We're really excited to have your expertise around cryptocurrencies and alternative currencies in the market. And maybe we can just start off by discussing cryptocurrencies and kind of the state of that market as it stands right now.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I think we've got to look at, before we start looking at exactly the state of the market now, I think it's also important to understand why the market even exists. And just touch on that for a second. Why do we even have cryptocurrencies? And I think, my movement into alternative currencies started in 2008, like I think a lot of people's journeys did for this, where they realized that, banks are not risk-free deposits of funds. When you put your money in the bank, it ceases to be yours. That money is put at risk and it is lent out. It's a liability of the bank. And that's a problem for people and problem for businesses that have money and want to be able to put it into those banks. And of course, we get all kinds of insurances from the FDIC and et cetera. But, at some point, they're going to change the rules, and they've already passed legislation called bail-in rather than bail-out, which means that next time there's a banking crisis, instead of the government's bailing out the banks, they might say to you, actually, we're going to do bail-in this time, which means that if you've got a significant amount of money in the bank, they swap that for shares in the bank, which you may or may not get back in a few years' time. And that's what they did in Cyprus. They tried it. They've passed the legislation. So it's something we've all got to be cognizant of. And then, of course, inflation. And I think very few commentators are talking about the one of the biggest drivers for inflation, of course, is money printing. And, inflation is now rip-roaring through the economy. It's affecting individuals. It's affecting businesses. I thought it was bad back in 2008 when governments were trying to keep it at around 2%. Over my lifetime, the dollar has lost more than 85% of its purchasing power.
Man,
let's just think about that. 85% of its purchasing power. And that was before actually the surge in inflation. I calculated that. And so, there's a need, or people have been looking for something to hedge against systemic risk. They've been looking for something to hedge against inflation. And also, generally speaking, the financial system is getting better at payments and cross-border payments. But again, they're looking for efficiencies with that too. So that's why we're kind of in this space. I think, innovations around Bitcoin model a lot on gold and other types of cryptocurrencies now, like Ethereum and even stablecoins, of what's created this, what was, a $3 trillion market. And obviously what we've seen this year is that $3 trillion market completely, collapsed to below $1 trillion. Which is a huge drop for anybody involved in the cryptocurrency industry. But, 1 trillion is still better than a kick in the teeth. I mean, it's a significant industry still. And I don't see it going away. And there's been a huge amount of money invested in that. But, we all know it's being volatile. We've seen that volatility on a weekly, sometimes daily basis. We've seen huge swings in the value of Bitcoin. For instance, it's gone down from, $65,000 down to, I think, about, I think we're currently at about, $17,000, something like that. And again, that volatility is huge. But, previous to that, of course, we saw huge gains. I mean, it went from $3,000 or $4,000 over a few years up to $65,000. So you can see the attraction and why people got involved in it. Hey, it's this fantastic growth story, and we can handle the volatility in the belief that growth story is going to continue forever. But I think what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine was really telling. I think it was the time when we saw that actually cryptocurrencies are definitely what I consider a risk-on asset. Yeah, they're a speculative asset that may or may not work, may or may not stand the test of time. There's lots of optimism around it and certainly lots of ideas around how it can benefit society, but it's very much still a risky asset, as opposed to, say, something like other alternatives like gold, which are just considered slightly more boring, but risk-off assets and stuff. So when Ukraine was invaded by Russia, then we saw the crypto price plummet and we saw the gold price go up, for instance. But there's lots of advantages around this, apart from even the hedging against inflation and the, hedging against the systemic risk and the payments technology. Just generally speaking, the tech, the ability to program these currencies is what's exciting a lot of people, isn't it? So I definitely think that crypto is here to stay, but we've all got to understand what it is and understand its nature.
Yeah, we do have to understand what it is, because it doesn't seem as solid as something like holding money in your hands, but then we all know that money doesn't have any backing anymore. And as you've already mentioned, the inflation and the things with banks can be risky as well. So, as organizations are looking to getting into alternative currencies, are there benefits that they can look at? You've already mentioned a lot of risk, but there've got to be benefits to getting into this.
Yeah, there's huge ones. As I said, some alternatives do protect against inflation. I mean, you can't get any worse than fiat currency in my mind when it comes to inflation. I mean, it's just it's the most terrible product, in the world when it comes to maintaining its purchasing power. So companies, especially ones who are long-term, doing well, where do they put that money? In order to maintain your purchasing power, whether you're a company or an individual, you're having to make risky investments just to make sure you're maintaining your purchasing power of what's on your balance sheet. And that really, for me, is wrong. So we've all got to look for how alternatives can help us make that fight. And as I said, transactions and payments. I mean, a lot of people are using cryptocurrencies for payments. It could be stablecoins as well, for instance, although we've got to remind ourselves that a stablecoin is still backed by the inferior, in my mind, fiat currency. Is no different. Just because it's a stablecoin, it's still losing its purchasing power over time. But at least it has the technology wrapper around it with a stablecoin. So, using cryptocurrencies, whether it's Bitcoin or a stablecoin, to be able to move value from one part of the world to another, obviously there's growing use of that. There's trillions of dollars worth of transactions now happening. And sometimes, they're used for in real need, people trying to get money out of difficult and regulatory environments. Like, people are worried in China now about what's going on with their premier, and is it a good business friendly place anymore or not? And even though they've banned cryptocurrency over there, mining, etc., a lot of companies are still trying to use that to move money offshore. But then just generally efficient, trying to move money quickly, it can be used for that. So yeah, I think they're all the benefits that we're all trying to find. I would say though that the idea, that it's a get rich quick thing, you've got to decide what business you're in. Are you in the business of making widgets or providing this service, or you're in the business of using your hard-earned profits to speculate in markets? I don't really see that as a benefit.
Yeah, that is really tough as you're trying to weigh the benefits versus the So you discuss a lot about gold as a risk-off asset. And if anybody's heard you talk in the news, you talk a lot about the benefits of having gold. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that and how can that benefit, organizations or people or individuals who are looking to kind of have a more not as risky assets in their portfolios.
Sure. Well, I mean, gold is valued globally by just about everybody on this planet, no matter what culture or region that you are from, no matter what demographic you're in. Everybody understands the value of gold, because gold has been the ultimate store of value for literally thousands of years. And it has a proven track record in holding its purchasing power. I mean, in the time, as I said, that the dollar and the pound and the euro, et cetera, had lost 85% of their purchasing power over my lifetime. Gold's purchasing power went up by over 500%, and in fact, it still buys you what it did 2,000 years ago. Never mind just 50. So there is nothing that compares with gold when it comes to a store of value. But of course, what about the medium of exchange? And a lot of people say, well, gold, it's a great store of value, but it's a useless medium of exchange. You can't exactly pop down to your local supplier and buy some goods with your gold. You can't chip that off. They're not going to accept coins, etc. Well, actually, people need to wake up. There are lots of changes in the space, and certainly Glint has built technology that allows gold to be used as money. So, for instance, in Glint's case, what we've done is built a kind of payments and trading technology that effectively allows you to hold your, diversify some of your working capital into gold. So you can have a euro wallet, a dollar wallet, a pound wallet, and a gold wallet. You can buy as little as a penny or $10 million worth. We've fractionalized the ownership of that gold. So, it's easy to use it as money. And we've even implemented payment instruments that allow people to be able to, this is a MasterCard, for instance, linked to a Glint account that allows me to spend my gold in real time. We're the first company in the world to enable physical gold, real allocated gold that I own, to be used in payments in real time like that. But you do have to be careful, like a lot of these things with the cryptocurrencies or with gold, you've got to be careful of the nuances. Something can be very important. So when you buy gold, you've got to ask yourself, what kind of gold are you buying? Are you buying real gold? Or are you buying paper gold? Is the gold that you're buying, the physical gold, is it allocated to you? Do you legally own it, or is it unallocated gold, which you kind of own, but it can be lent out by the custodian? Don't really want that, really, do you? Because when the music stops, it might not be there. Or are you buying futures, options, derivatives? Are you buying ETFs, where you're buying a share in a fund, which may or may not be backed by gold? I believe, and what we've built Glint around, is that you should own allocated gold. That's gold that you own. It's no one else's liability. But we've built this system that allows it to be used as everyday money. And so whether it is, diversifying your portfolio, your savings, where it's allowing some of your ready money to be stored somewhere safe, protecting you from inflation, etc., or whether it's diversifying some of your working capital, your balance sheet, as if you're a company, then I think there's lots of reasons why you might want to own gold.
So this isn't something that many people are talking about or saying at all. And as you were saying that, it kind of made me think of, the old days where gold was like the standard, where everybody wanted to get their hands on it. You had the gold rush in San Francisco, California in the 1800s and all of those things. How can you have gold as your backing and still be able to spend with it? Even, you have your card and the ways you described, but it seems like it can still tank just like everything else, right?
Well, it's really important to understand that when things are priced in dollars or pounds, for instance, in the UK or in euros, when they're priced in that fiat currency, then the confidence in those fiat currencies can, of course, go up and down as well.
Okay.
So the confidence in the dollar is going up and down every day, but generally down.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's up and down, generally down. That's why its purchasing power is decreasing over time, but gold is just gold. It doesn't change. It's the same thing as it was yesterday, as it was 1,000 years ago. It's created when two neutron stars collide in space. So its nature cannot be changed, which is why we love it. Because in my mind, anything that its nature is defined by a human being is subject to change or subject to corruption, even if with the best intentions originally. So yes, you've got to understand that if you're in gold, but you're working in a foreign currency, then you've got to be aware of those foreign currency fluctuations. But it hasn't tanked in 2,000 years. Is it going to tank tomorrow? There's no way it's going to tank tomorrow. Yeah. I bet my life on it. It might drop by 10% or something like that over time. It's medium. I think its median monthly variation is like 0.5% or something like that. It's certainly not as volatile as a cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrencies will get there someday, I'm sure, over time, and more mass adoption and less, less affected by whales within the system, etc. That's one of the advantages of gold, is that it's owned by everybody. When I say everybody, it's owned by lots of people globally. And from the poorest person on the street in some parts of the world to central banks, remember, still back their currency. They back their power by holding gold. A lot of them do. The US still does. Russia was building up gold over the last 10 years. So has China. I don't think there's any coincidence about that. Their actions today are, I'm sure, planned and carefully thought through over the previous decade. So, and gold backed money until relatively recently. I mean, I don't consider myself that old, but 1970 was when I was born, and the dollar was backed by gold then. It was backed buy gold until 1971. And I know some people might have, as I get older, I start to realize that actually, I start to understand now how whole generations of people can be born into scenarios where they have no understanding or appreciation of what went just before them. And actually, that can lead to all kinds of challenges. Like, for instance, how many of the audience who are listening to this podcast have had a mortgage on a property when interest rates were over 5%, and very few, I'm guessing, and yet in my parents' generation, there were interest rates of up to 12%, and lots of people were used to paying mortgages with interest rates at around 5%. So, but, gold backed money until 1971. And we didn't come off the gold standard because gold wasn't very good. We came off the gold standard because the very fact that gold was awesome. Nixon loved gold, but the problem is that they couldn't afford the Vietnam War. They couldn't afford the promises to the electorate. So they were printing money. And de Gaulle, the French president, said, I think you're printing more dollars than you have gold, guys. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to use my Navy to come into New York and swap my pallet loads of dollars for gold. And that's what was happening in 1970, 1971. The amount of gold in Fort Knox was going down, and Nixon was like, we can't lose all our gold. So they went away to think about it and decided, let's just come off the gold standard. And they did that temporarily. It was supposed to be a temporary window. And of course, Nixon ended up getting thrown out. And we live today with the consequences of that, which is that we're off a gold standard. Governments, central banks all over the world print as much money as they want to their heart's content. And actually, it ends up being the greatest tax that no one talks about. Because if you're a saver, if you're a responsible saver, and you put in your money away, and you don't want to put it at risk in a stock market, because a company can go to zero. A fiat currency can go to zero, and they do. It's already, the dollar and the pound have already lost 85% of the value, so they're nearly at zero anyway. Gold never does. I think that's why people are already attracted to it. But I think what seems to have kind of just gotten lost in translation or missed is that everyone's kind of rushed towards creating alternatives based on technology and dismissing gold without realizing that actually companies like Glint, and we're not the only ones, there are Stablecoins and stuff like that based on these types of things, are using technology to make the ultimate form of money the future. Back to the future of money, I'd kind of maybe call it, but certainly giving everybody their own personal gold standard. And our vision certainly is a world where everyone has an equal opportunity to prosper. And we think that a bottom-up return to sound money is the only way we're going to get to any kind of fair society, because, and governments are not going to do it. So private individuals, directors and companies, we need to take control of our money ourselves. And I think, this whole explosion in innovation and stuff is just fantastic for people and businesses. You can always rely on people's innovation to come to the rescue. But, there are challenges with all these things, as you've intuited. There are problems, aren't there, with implementing these new things into businesses, and that people have got to be very careful about what they're doing. They've got to think carefully before they jump, I think.
They do have to think carefully before they jump. And that's a, perfect segue, thinking about your accounting and finance team, who would need to take into consideration all of these elements as they're, putting these on the balance sheet. What are some considerations that they do need to take into consideration as they're implementing this, and are there best practices they should think about?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think, you've got to be thinking about four things. You've got to be thinking about volatility. This is a risk on, and if it's cryptocurrencies, it's a risk on assets. If it's gold, it has a level of volatility as well. So you've got to be thinking about that. You've got to be thinking about anti-money laundering issues, especially around cryptocurrencies. Is there a possibility that the cryptocurrency you're bringing in to your business or to your life has been, proceeds of crime? You've got to look at the regulatory issues around tax, around nature of money itself, around, is a cryptocurrency or gold money, or is it property, or is it security? And we've got to look at the systems and processes we've got in the business, because a lot of those are designed for the incumbent system, not for the new one. So I think, we've got to look very carefully at those in a bit more detail. So you say, okay, so regulatory wise, well, we can't really, you can lobby governments to make changes, and those businesses that might be listening that have some influence, that you've got to be talking to government officials about that. Obviously, there's been a lot of change or concerns about what changes there are in the elections in the US. And I think it's quite obvious that Republicans seem to be a little bit more cryptocurrency friendly compared to the Democrats. But either way, both parties are going to see, some kind of clampdowns on the cryptocurrency industry. So businesses, my appeal to governments and regulators out there is stop being vague. Businesses and people need regulatory clarity on this. So there's chances that I think the problem in the US at the moment, and any government where they don't have a leading majority, is that any crypto-related bills might not get passed if there's kind of, unless there's bipartisan kind of, belief in what needs to get done. And I think that's an issue. I don't want to get political about things, but generally speaking, when you lead to more two parties, when they're so far away from each other and they can't find a good center, then actually nothing gets done. But we do need that clarity. So I appeal to regulators and governments around the world to try and do that, because the SEC chair, Gary Gensler, has said that, he believes the majority of cryptocurrencies are securities. And in the UK, they see it as property. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners think it's money. So we got to get to the bottom of that. But, when you're diversifying your balance sheet to include alternative assets, you've got the challenges around your reporting currency and what effect that might have on your EBITDA. Losses may occur, even if only temporarily. And of course, when you're doing your audits and your accounts, that can lead to quite a misleading view or misleading information for readers of those financial statements. You could have a situation where your assets on your, look great because cryptocurrencies just shot up, and or it could be that the cryptocurrencies just bottomed the day before you had to, submit your account. So what is happening? How do you deal with that? Capital gains tax. I see gold as money. I don't see it as an investment. It's just store of value. And if you said to me, "Hey, Jason, I'm in London at the moment," so if you said, "Jason, come over to the States and let's have a week here. Let's discuss cryptocurrencies and alternative currencies and gold in more detail," and I might just take I might buy £10,000 worth of dollars. And I take those dollars. Maybe it's I've got $12,000 or $13,000, and I come to the US, and you get there and you say to me, "Hey, Jason, don't worry about spending anything. I'm feeling great. I just won the lottery, so I'm paying for everything." And then I come back with my money after a week, and the pounds, we've had another Brexit problem, or problem with another prime minister has been elected and another one's resigned, and the pounds plummeted. Suddenly, I now have 17,000. When I exchange my dollars back for pounds, I've got more pounds than I left with. There's a capital gain there, but do I have to report that to the tax authorities? Except there's lots of exemptions around using money and in relation to tax, but there isn't with cryptocurrencies or with gold, because the traditional view of gold is it's a bar of gold, it's an investment. The views of cryptocurrencies are varied, so as we say, some see them as different things. So you've got to be careful about that, and you've got to get your advice about in your own region about how we should be treating that, and probably taking the safest approach to say, well, we'll assume there has to be a tax on this, capital gains tax or whatever. We're going to put that money aside, even if you don't submit it. I don't know. Every region has got to deal with their own situations there, but you must be cognizant of it. And how do you track all the fees? How do you track those fluctuations in the currency's value? With cryptocurrencies, it can be quite big gas fees, for instance, around some things, and the fees can be different depending on what's going on in the network, and the blockchain's kind of busy at the time. Suddenly those fees are going up. You've got a difficult situation where you're trying to manage all of that, manage that volatility, manage the counterparty risk in terms of AML. So I think there are a couple of different approaches to this, though. You can take a hands-off approach where you go, look, we're going to take any crypto that comes to us as a business. We're not going to actively go out there and buy crypto, but what we might do is accept cryptocurrency in lieu of payments of services or products. You might do that with gold, or you might do that with cryptocurrency. And what you could say to you could choose a vendor and exchange to exchange that for you automatically. So you might not even touch the cryptocurrency. Like you say, look, I still want the currency of my residence. I still want that, my default currency for my accounts to come into our system. You can pay me in cryptocurrency or gold, but my vendor or exchange that I'm working with will convert that to dollars as it comes in. And that's obviously the easiest way to deal with this. And so nothing really changes for you in the back end. But if you do want to take that hands-on approach, you've got to think about three things. You've got to think about, well, what treasury systems and processes do I have to put in place? What are my banking relationships going to say about this? Are they going to be happy that we're taking on cryptocurrencies about that? They might not allow me to exchange it and bank it later, and some banks, increasingly they're more comfortable with things like alternatives like gold and cryptocurrencies, but you've got to ask your question, what is my bank's attitude towards this? And then you've got to choose who your vendors are. Are you going to be working with vendors like exchanges, or are you going to be working with your own wallets? There's challenges with both. If you've got your own wallets, how are you managing access to those wallets and security around it? How are you dealing with, if you're working with an exchange, then, we've all seen some of the problems in the last 48 hours with FTX. I think it was Fortune magazine. I was just in the club the other day and I saw Fortune magazine, and there's the founder of FTX on the cover about he's going to be the future. And here we are with the company near collapse. And so, who do you choose to work with if you're working with a vendor? So I think there's plenty to think about. But I think it's important that any business remains curious, remains innovative, creative. And you got to get on, you kind of got to start thinking about this and doing this, because, you'll find the right solution for your business if you take it seriously. And that could be the difference between the company, between success and failure. With inflation running in some countries at anywhere between 10 and 80% at the moment, This is the difference. And we live in a world that's very competitive. And so you've got to think, you've got to think out the box, and you've got to, I think those people who embrace technology, generally speaking, get rewarded in the long term.
I agree with you. I think they will, and like you said, you'd have to know your local regulations. Like in the US, the FASB voted on October 12th that cryptocurrencies are no longer intangible assets. Their guidance is changed. So you have to know that, and you have to know how to account for that. And, and I know other IFAC and all those other places are trying to consider how you should view these or account for these. And so you have to know what your local organization, your local regulatory body is doing.
Yeah. And as you say, it's changing all the time. So, Hong Kong, for instance, had a very strict kind of attitude towards cryptocurrencies. But then what happened is they saw money flowing to Singapore, and which had taken a much more kind of relaxed view on cryptocurrencies. And now the tables are turning. Hong Kong has just announced that it wants to be crypto friendly. Singapore's starting to tighten up its regulations around that, and even saying that they might restrict it because of the volatility. And, in April here in the UK government said, that we were going to announce, rules to say that, Stablecoins could be recognized as a valid form of payment. Not quite sure what that means. They obviously want Britain to become now a global hub for crypto asset technology and investment. But what does that really mean? Are you going to accept our taxes in cryptocurrency? And actually that's something I didn't mention, being able to pay, your employee related taxes, or your value added taxes, your product taxes. I think early on I sold a company to a business, one of the very first electronic kind of barter based trade currencies, and I was kind of involved in that business for a few months after the exit, and they had a very simple approach. I can get paid in this alternative currency, but at the end of the day, the government still wants to be paid in their currency. So you just have to again account for that.
Yeah. So, as we think about the future, look into our crystal ball, do you think we're heading toward, like what the science fiction movies always say, like, oh, I'll pay you 20,000 credits. Here you go, or are we not going that direction? Do you think we'll get to that point where everything will be, virtual, or do you think we'll still have some sort of hard currency that we'll be working with?
Well, I think the term is we always overestimate what can happen in the next 5 years and underestimate what can happen in the next 20. And I think I was involved in virtual reality the first time it was cool back in the 90s, and I see what's going on with Meta and Facebook, and there's no way the virtual reality is going to deliver the kind of returns and the kind of innovation that is needed, that that is reflected with the enthusiasm that people like Facebook have for it and stuff. We're just a million miles away from where we need to be. And so, it's the same with cryptocurrencies. For instance, they need to mature. They need to get more mass adoption, but before the volatility will start to come down, they can be considered valuable stores of value. They're already good medium of exchange-ish. Transactions are still very high and most costly in most of these cryptocurrencies. So there's still a lot of immaturity there. And I love the enthusiasm for it. And I do think that, I'm singing from the same hymn sheet in terms of gold, for instance. But I think long term, there will be lots of progress made, and some progress that maybe some of the listeners aren't even thinking about right now. What's the effect of quantum computing on finance? And you might say, well, what's that got to do with finance? Well, it's got a lot to do with security. It's got, the idea that you could have two elements quantumly entangled with each other and then separated by great distances. I don't profess to know. I know a tiny amount is very dangerous, but the idea that you could have new security systems based on quantum computing might mean, for instance, that you can actually tell whether or not this is a real user accessing the system when the system is on Earth and the person is on Mars. So actually there's no reason why, for instance, currencies could be intergalactic, and whether that's a fiat system, whether it is a cryptocurrency system, whether it is a gold-based system, I don't think matters. I think that the future there's a huge amount of innovation and excitement for me as we move forward. I would say, though, fiat currencies all come to an end. There is not one fiat currency that stood the test of time ever. And we can see that they are becoming, right in front of our eyes, worthless. Yeah. And so I think that there will be an end to the US dollar, the pound, and the euro. But when it will be, they'll probably last a lot longer than we think they ever will. Gold will still be here and still, I think, a store of value. And I think with the technologies behind it, it's a tantalizing opportunity to be a fantastic global interstellar currency based on the kind of technology we could bring forward. But I do think that blockchain and distributed ledgers in general can offer a huge amount of increased transparency and trustworthiness in the long run, to make accountants and finance teams' lives much easier.
I agree. And Jason, I just want to thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been great having this conversation. I know we could keep talking for a long time, but thanks for sharing your expertise with us today.
Adam, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
This has been Count Me In, IMA's podcast, providing you with the latest perspectives of thought leaders from the accounting and finance profession. If you like what you heard and you'd like to be counted in for more relevant accounting and finance education, visit IMA's website at www.imanet.org.